Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming out or tuning in on Easter Monday. I'm delighted to introduce someone who needs no introduction, Alex Mayhew, who will present us with a hint of what he'll be discussing at length tomorrow. Alex holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Ottawa and a master's degree in library and information science from Western. And if I were to sum up Alex's intellectual life in a word, that word would be eclectic. He will be known to many at FIMS as a teacher. His roster of courses includes two of our core courses, Perspectives in LIS and Information Organization. He has taught classification and indexing and critical librarianship, and coming this summer, digital humanities. He has also created our very popular course, Librarianship and Evolving Technologies. Alex's research is equally diverse. He is a lab member of Dr. Rubin's Rewiring for Happiness project. He has presented his research at both the local and international chapters of the International Society for Knowledge Organization, the Association for Information Science and Technology, the Document Academy, the Canadian Association for Information Science, the Conference on Pragmatism and the Philosophy of Science, and the Canadian Society for the Study of Practical Ethics. He has published in the journals Knowledge Organization and the Canadian Journal of Practical Philosophy. And in addition to all that, he is currently and actively collaborating on the raising of a daughter and a son, both of whom arrived while he was doing all that other stuff. Please welcome Alex Mayhew.
You put it all together like that, it sounds almost impressive. It's not really. All right, so thank you everyone for coming to my public lecture today on my dissertation, on my thesis, Phylomemetic Cataloging, an optimistic proposal for a radical bibliographic catalog. All right, so first of all, just some acknowledgements. I want to thank my family, my friends, my peers, my mentors. I could not have come as far as I have without all of you. All errors, of course, are my own. Relatively simple agenda, perhaps deceptively simple agenda for today. Three things, basically. I want to talk about traditional cataloging. I want to talk about my alternative, phylomemetic cataloging. I'm going to go through 4 different stages to talk about how I built it, the ontology, theory, paradigm, and practice. And then I'll have a few conclusions at the end. And that's where I really have my actual point. So if that's the agenda, I think we should start off with a few definitions because it's already terminology heavy. So we're going to see this table a lot, so apologies, but start off with the ontology. So the ontology in my research is the set of entities, attributes, and relationships that are of concern. They are the stuff that you can work with. They are part of what defines a field of endeavor. It can be knowledge organization, it can be biology, it can be history, it can be auto repair, it can be painting and art. Whatever your domain of concern is, there's things that are inside scope and there's things outside of scope. If you're doing auto repair, choosing a particular set of watercolors is not necessarily your primary concern. All right. So that's the top level of the stack. Next is theory. And I define theory as an ontology plus a set of principles or best practices, methods, guidelines, things that organize the stuff. So how things ought to be done. If the ontology is like the list of acceptable ingredients, the theory is sort of like a recipe. And then next layer is the paradigm. So which is a theory plus a set of goals. What we're actually trying to do. So you can have 2 domains that are very similar in terms of ontology and theory, but because they have different goals, they can be radically different. For example, you could view biology and medicine as having the same ontology and the same theory, or at least similar theories, but they have very different goals. Biology is descriptive, is trying to understand and describe the world. Medicine is prescriptive, is saying, okay, how do we change the world in ways that we prefer? So the goals can be very important. And then there's practice, which is what we actually do, which is not always the same as what we're trying to do. So those are the definitions going into this project. So let's start off with traditional cataloging. Now, I'm using the phrase traditional cataloging to refer to contemporary cataloging in the Anglo-American tradition. There are many other traditions. I just needed a label for this, and so I don't want to repeat all of that every time, so I'm just going to call it traditional cataloging. There are many others. This is the one I'm most familiar with. All right, so traditional bibliographic description can be thought of as a set of instructions for creating new bibliographic records, such as a MARC record. Everyone loves these. They fill us with joy. And that's one of the things that we can do with these instructions. But I'm going to say, despite the practical focus of the rules, these rules have philosophical implications. This has been known, it's been worked on. And one of the things that these rules do is they define a vision for the bibliographic universe, which is a subset of the entire universe of knowledge. So the universe of knowledge is everything that humans think and create. The bibliographic universe is all the texts of variety, whatever varieties you might imagine that we create and have records of. So, books are text, movies, music, what have you. So it's not everything, but it defines, a chunk. So my contention is the layer cake that we just described a little while ago. In traditional cataloging, it was built bottom up. Their primary concern was cataloging practice. That's what they have as their central concern. And then the rest of the layers built up in service to making the practice happen more effectively and more in a more standardized way. So what was the practical concern they were worried about? Well, access and organization. They wanted to make sure the books on the shelves could be accessed, and in order to make sure that they're accessed, they had to be organized in a fashion that would allow people to seek them out and obtain them. That's what they really wanted to facilitate. And, fair enough. If you have books on a shelf, you don't want them to be lost. I can see why you would want that to be your primary concern. In order to support that practice, I'm glossing over a lot of history here, but one of the things that happened is there was development of a set of goals called user tasks, where they say, okay, in order to make sure that access and organization happens, we want the catalog to facilitate certain tasks that a user might have. We want the user to be able to use the catalog to find the book you're looking for, to identify it once you found it, to actually select it, obtain it, and then once you're at a particular point on the shelf or in the catalog, what have you, you now have the opportunity to look around it and explore a little bit. These are the things that you keep in mind when you're designing the catalog or changing it or developing the next iteration or what have you. Up another level of abstraction. Well, what sort of guidelines do you want to have when you're making a catalog work? There's a bunch of different ways, again, that you could articulate this. This set comes from S.R. Ranganathan. He says that the catalog should be exhaustive, exclusive, updatable, and provide a helpful sequence, which means that the book, the catalog should represent all of the books in the collection. That should be exhaustive. Everything that's in the collection should be in the catalog. It should be exclusive. Well, the book's only going to be one place on the shelf, so it should effectively only be in one place in the catalog. It should be updatable. Your collection is going to change, so you want the catalog to change to reflect it. And that sequence on the shelf and the sequence in the catalog should be a helpful sequence. That one-dimensional line, it should have patterns in it that people can recognize to help them, guide themselves through it more quickly and more effectively. And finally, in service to all that, there was an ontology developed. This is where we get to, I think, Barbara Tillett, and she articulated the idea that the fundamental elements of concern are works, and works are these essentialist things. They're sort of like Plato's forms. They are each work is a unique genesis. It has a well-defined creator or creators, and that original work is immaterial. It exists kind of in Platonic heaven, and every actual book that you will see on the shelf or exists in your catalog is a sort of imperfect reflection or shadow of that essentialist work. And yeah, every iteration or addition or alteration that comes after it, again, is just more reflections of that Platonic form. So that is a very condensed and a little bit compressed history of how the layer cake built up. Oh, in truth, it was all muddled together a lot more than that, but I'm trying to separate out the layers. So intricate abstractions like the library reference model, which includes the work, you can see it right here, were developed in order to standardize and harmonize traditional cataloging practice. And yeah, like that is a philosophical construct. Like you cannot go and dig one of these out of the ground. But what it does, if you have something like an essentialist work, it says something like there are a relatively small number of qualities that are necessary to robustly and accurately describe a record or work. And that's a really useful philosophical perspective if you're a really busy and overworked cataloger who wants to have the minimum amount of information possible to get the record working and move on, because you have a bunch more records to get through. But yeah, all of this builds up over time in order to support that goal of practice. Well, let's look at an alternative. What if we take a top-down approach instead? We don't have to. There's other ways that you could go about it. There's object-oriented design, there's structured design. Arguably, traditional cataloging was not designed bottom-up, it just happened to grow bottom-up. I'm intentionally designing top-down just to see what we can do. So traditional cataloging does include the question, what are the philosophical implications of cataloging practice? Phylomemetic cataloging starts with the question, what are the practical implications of our cataloging philosophy? So Dan Dennett has this quote, there's no such thing as philosophy-free science, only science that did not interrogate its philosophical assumptions. And so that's where I'm going to start. It's like, okay, all of that was built up. What sort of assumptions does it have? We already noticed that works are considered essentialist, so maybe that's worth investigating. So we're going to go top down. So remember, ontology is the entities, attributes, and relationships of concern. Traditional cataloging ontology posits essentialist works. It's entity focused. That's what it cares about. It deals with relationships, bibliographic relationships. It deals with bibliographic attributes, but it really cares centrally about the work. I am skeptical of essentialism. I think that essentialism can erase valuable complexity. That's not something that an overworked cataloger would necessarily want to hear all the time, but that's fine. We're maybe doing slightly different or but at least related projects. So I'm going to take the opportunity to suggest, well, if we're starting ontology first, if we're starting philosophical assumptions first, let's start with a non-essentialist view of the fundamental elements of the bibliographic universe. To do so, I'm going to make an analogy between texts and biological species, between the bibliographic universe and the biological universe. So let's look a little bit at the history here. So if we look at the history of biology, Linnaeus was entity-focused and essentialist. He said, okay, there are prototype specimens, individual members of a species, and all other members of the species will be compared against that. And if it's close enough, then it's part of the species. If it's too far away, it's a different species. That is how we define species, is by reference to the prototype. So that is roughly analogous, and very roughly analogous, to traditional cataloging. We saw some deviations from this. Mendel was attribute focused. He suggested that Genes were super important for understanding species. A species might be defined by its shared gene pool, the attributes that it shares in common or can be exchanged in common. The other one that I think you've probably all heard of is Darwin. He was relationship focused. He was concerned about lineage and descent. And what defines a species is common inheritance. So both of these are starting to drift away from that original core essentialist conception of a species. In the modern era, we have the modern synthesis, which combines all three ideas. They're still, species, but genes are a thing and descent is a thing. And when a species is understood to be a population that shares gene flow through time. So all of them are happening at once. But once you have all of those happening at once, the original essentialist prototype stops being referenced. That no longer actually is that important because like the very idea of a species starts to become a little bit nebulous. And that's fine because it's capturing more of the actual complexity of what's going on in the real world. It's a little harder, it's a little more complicated, but it's more powerful. Oh, yes, favorite picture. Okay, so this is a cladogram. So this modern synthesis in biology is called phylogenetics. Species are understood to be composed of genes and sitting in a web of relationships called clades. So just the clade is just all the descendants of a common ancestor. And this is a cladogram of all known life on Earth as of 2017 that this guy knew about. So still work in development. Here's the dinosaurs. I think we might have Tiktaalik around here. It doesn't matter. Yeah, that's one of the power, one of the pieces of power of the phylogenetic perspective is like the unity of all living things until we discover like aliens or something. So I am positing, by analogy with biology, a holistic understanding of texts wherein texts are imagined to be sitting in a web of relationships made up of recognizable elements and inheriting textual memes from their ancestors. In this way, texts are non-essentialist. We can see them that way. They are contingent, they didn't have to come into existence, and our understanding of them can change over time as the audience change or the audience sees the world in a new light. There's different levels of abstraction through which we can try and understand the bibliographic universe. And phylomemetics can capture that. This is the Phylomemetic Cataloguing ontology. So if we were going to put it into the table, non-essentialist texts, those are our primary entities, textual memes, textual clades, and memetic inheritance. So attributes, relationships, and then attribute relationships together. Let's keep going. So we got ourselves an ontology. Let's add in some principles, some guidelines for how we can make use of this stuff in a productive way. So traditional cataloging has exhaustive, exclusive, updatable, helpful sequences, and these principles aim to support cataloging in physical space. That's the tradition that it grew out of. They really cared about shelf order. There's been some tension between that tradition and the transition to online digital environments. I say, well, I'm already taking the opportunity to swap out the ontology. Let's change the theory as well. So I'm going to switch to a digital first assumption. It's not better, it's not worse, but you can achieve different results. And I think that's worth exploring. All right. I also felt a little bit cheeky, so I'm going to be riffing off of each of these. So exhaustive, I'm going to say instead of exhaustive, expanding. The catalog will never be complete, ever. Let's just embrace that process and say, okay, we can't have a catalog that will completely map onto the collection, especially if we consider the collection to be Earth. And so let's just acknowledge that from the beginning. Inclusive instead of exclusive. So digital items can appear in multiple places in the catalog. There's no shelf space online. You can just have a book be in more than one place at a time. So, I mean, many people who've worked in a library have had the experience of the, patron coming up to you and says, I want the book on dogs. And you're like, okay, like the books on dogs are in 50 different places in the library. What do you want to know? Why can't they be all together? Of course they could, if we wanted them to. That's probably overly simplistic example, but this is one of the things we could pursue if we took the opportunity to switch to digital first assumption. This one's going to be controversial. I'm changing updatable to universal. Because the digital environment recognizes updatableness as just like default, let's think about what else we might want. I'm proposing, again, it's not necessarily better or worse. It has implications that I think are worth discussing, but I'm proposing thinking about the catalog as universal. For my proposal, I suggest a single global union catalog, which could be a place where diverse voices are brought together. There are challenges with this. How do you make sure that one voice doesn't drown out all the rest, amongst other things? But if we're trying to design something that's somewhat different than what currently exists, I think it's an idea at least worth articulating. Helpful sequences. So this is sort of like being changing from exclusive to inclusive. If you have a digital environment, you don't have to have just one sequence being represented by the one-dimensional line that is shelf order. We can represent multiple diverse understandings of a text. And they can just all be available. That's one of the ways I think we could help not erase diverse voices. Again, there are still questions to be answered. Feel free to read the thesis if you're interested in more. And I wanted to add one more. And I'm adding in yet another controversial idea, which is consilience, which is the idea that all knowledge is one, the unity of knowledge. The catalog could then serve as a site of unification for diverse knowledge organization efforts beyond traditional cataloging. And let's take a quick look at that. So, drawing inspiration from the phylomemetic ontology, which didn't have to have any effect on the layers lower down, but I chose to in this case. We can look at knowledge organization projects that are attribute focused, like Mendel and his genes, and projects that are relationship focused, like Darwin and descent. And since textual memes and textual clades are already part of our phylomemetic ontology, projects that fit into those two molds could be integrated into a reimagined, expansive bibliographic cataloging effort. So really quickly, some examples of textual meme-focused projects. Arguably, Library of Congress subject headings are kind of like that. There are small individual descriptions of what sort of content you might expect inside of a book. But we have things like TV tropes and studies on character archetypes and plot archetypes. There's at least 6 different attempts that I'm aware of to create subject heading classifications of science fiction and fantasy conceits. There's a very long history of fairy tale motif studies, going all the way back to at least the Grimm brothers. There's this idea of music basic concepts. What are the granular components of music that could be sussed out to describe what you might find in a piece of music? And another one here is like structured scientific concepts. So you have things like what sort of research methods do different pieces of research have in common, or methodologies, or underlying philosophical assumptions, or data sets. And all of these could be granular components that are shared in common. Next one, textual relationships focused projects. Obvious one here, citations, bibliometrics, sure, that's a lot can be done there. Another one is schematics. So this here is 52 versions of, I don't think I'll be able to pronounce it correctly, but it's a Hindu holy book. And each of the different variants sometimes has descendants, and sometimes 2 or 3 of the different versions actually recombine by certain scribes looking at different ones to create yet new versions of those books. And that is very much like a family tree or a phylomemetic tree. There's a question about canonicity, like when is a book part of a canon or outside of the canon? What sort of relationship does it have? whole topic of fan fiction there. There's scientific topic evolution. How does the understanding of a particular scientific topic change over time? How are older concepts giving way to newer concepts? There's a really cool project called the Mathematical Genealogy Project. And well, I don't think it's finding, but like a related project says that there's somewhere around 13 mathematical like families that almost 80% of mathematicians are part of. So we're talking about supervisors and PhD students, and those lineages, apparently there's like 13 main ones that account for 80% of all mathematicians. Really cool thing about that project is they're constantly being asked for the theses. Instead of just the relationships, they want to actually have people want to have the thesis themselves. But they keep on saying, we're not a library. We just record the connections. We could pair with them. Genealogy of theater, homage. I mean, there's lots of examples there. It's like, okay, is West Side Story Romeo and Juliet? Well, there's obviously connections. And then, sorry, I just had to include this one. Recipe descent with modification. So this is the phylomemetic tree of clam chowder. And all the different recipes that descended from 18th century clam chowder. We got New England, Delaware. You can see like tomato-based. I didn't even know there was tomato-based clam chowder. I suppose Portuguese and Rhode Island. Anyways, so yeah, you can have very different types of texts sit in relationships to one another. All right, so the catalog could be a place of synthesis for these sorts of efforts. Consilience is the principle that underpins that unification. And I'm going to show one final example. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, so apologies. The Lion King is not Hamlet, but it is clearly a descendant. We have, the prodigal hero runs off and comes back. They have the dead person conversation talking to the ghost of the father. They have the treacherous uncle. But in the transition from tragedy to comedy, the clown's exit stage right trope was not retained. Timon and Pumbaa do stick around, even though Rosencrest and Guildenstern died. So here's the next layer of the table. Phylomemetic cataloging theory, the catalog should be expanding, inclusive, universal, helpful sequences, and consilient. Let's just keep plowing on through. So, paradigm, the theory plus a set of goals. So what are the goals? Conventional cataloging, the goals of conventional cataloging are best expressed by the list of user tasks, which, just to remind you, is find, identify, select, obtain, and explore. You want to be able to find the book you're looking for, identify it once you've found it, select it, and obtain it, and then once you're there, be able to explore around. I was feeling slightly less cheeky this time around, so I decided to just add 4 more. Well, add 3 more and modify 1. So I'm adding participate, ethical use, and infrastructure, and I'm modifying explore to include visualize, just because I think that's part of it. You could have done otherwise. So participate, incorporating user participation in a productive manner. So I would say that this has been part of library catalog since the very beginning. You could go up to the librarian and say, hey, I found an error in your catalog, and they can fix it. They take out the card, they take the pen, they correct it. Even in modern OPACs, there's the report a problem button. It's just not very well developed as a function. Another thing to note about participation is that most knowledge workers will not have the knowledge and dedication of a member of a specialized knowledge community. If you're part of a religious movement or a fandom or an ideological movement or a profession, you will have knowledge of that domain that the cataloger probably won't, unless they are also a member of that community. We have models we can learn from, both good and bad. Wikipedia, TV tropes, even Reddit, they have elements of them that I think we can learn from. So user contribution, semantic data, traditional metadata could all exist on different lamination layers, so no single understanding need crowd out other understandings. I want to represent the complexity we find, not erase it. Again, there's technical challenges here, but I don't think it's impossible to address them. Next one I wanted to address is ethical use. So the design of the catalog needs to promote ethical decision-making, even by participants who have not received formal training. If we're going to have participate be a user task, then we also need to have ethical use be a user task. How do we ensure that there are community norms that can help enculturate newcomers or correct vandalism or what have you? Again, there are systems that we can look to for inspiration, and there are practical strategies for implementation that might be able to mitigate the worst possibilities, and even possibly even cultivate good possibilities. Visualize, I think of this as an extension of the Explore user task. So textual family trees and cladograms of text could be dynamically constructed by the catalog. This one's handcrafted, and it shows, pyramids and Thisbe and a bunch of its descendants and relationships. It goes into Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, the other version of West Side Story, Troilus and Cressida, which I should actually look that up sometime, see if it's any good. But the fact that we've never heard about it. All right. Finally, infrastructure. This is probably the most unusual user task to be added to the list. But what I'm suggesting is that there are a class of people that we could think of as patrons who make use of the library's data that don't actually directly go into the library or directly use the catalog. Indirect users. They are people that we could support as well. So the semantic web standards that underpin my design could be used to support applications beyond and functions beyond just the catalog itself. This is like the open data, like semantic data graph, using Wikidata as the center. Just as a side note here, the new version of the cataloging standard replacing MARC is called BibFrame, and it's already going in this direction. So as weird as this one seems, we're kind of already going that way anyway. All right, let's get the user tasks. Find, identify, select, obtain, explore plus visualize, ethical use, participate, and infrastructure. It's a little much, but it's not too bad. All right. Phylomemetic practice. Remember, practice is what traditional cataloging is ultimately most concerned about. It's slightly sparser for me. So what do we actually do? So I built a functioning prototype phylomemetic catalog using Semantic MediaWiki and Gephi visualization program. It is simple. The purpose of the prototype is to be the last link in the chain built throughout this, the entire thesis that demonstrates the impact a change in core ontology can have on all aspects of cataloging, from cataloging theory to practice to the cataloging environment. It is not supposed to be the be-all and end-all. If you approach cataloging from a practice-centered perspective and you look at the prototype, you will be underwhelmed. But if you look at cataloging from an ontology first perspective, you can say these ideas are possible to implement. And that's what it's supposed to show, that it's at all possible. So well crude, the output of the prototype demonstrates the proof of principle. Oh, it's lovely, isn't it? Okay. So yeah, we have, again, pyramids and Thisbe, which is, you can kind of see, and then it has an influence relationship to Romeo and Juliet, which in turn has an influence relationship to West Side Story. You can see the dates, you can see the authors. It's possible to create visualizations out of catalog records that are put into this semantic form. There are somewhat nicer ones. If we want to look at a Mendelian clade instead, we're looking at the star-crossed lovers trope. And we have an early example, again, pyramids and Thisbe, Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story. I haven't actually seen West Side Story. I assume it's in there. And so like we can do both family trees, we can do clades, we can even layer them over top of each other and show that you can have complex relationships of both mimetic inheritance and lines of influence. So again, rather crude, but it shows some possibilities. I also articulated a number of possible applications that I was not able to physically implement, but seem very doable, at least some of them, on the basis of the technology I used. So the first one is detecting errors. So automating logical inference. Apologies to some of the audience in a few moments. So if texts sit in relationships with each other, then we might be able to detect conflicting metadata. So consider the following example. Here is this Google Scholar entry for the thesis, the format of the pre-Hispanic mixed-text historical screenfold manuscripts by Nick Johnson, published 2005, cited by one article. So we've got the citation, the year 2005, cited by one. Apologies, this example won't work anymore very soon because it's about to be cited by two, but for the moment. This is the citing article, Ritualized Discourses in the Mesoamerican Codices. It has a listed publication date of 1881. That's not how time works. So if you go into it, it was actually published in 2015. And we can do a little bit more examination, figure out what the date of 1881 came from. And it turns out it's actually part of this German phone number. So using semantic inference, a phylomemetic catalog could highlight this as this conflict as an area in need of additional attention. It wouldn't tell you which way is right. It would just tell you there's something going on here. It's worth taking a little closer look. Yeah, and then the catalogers could seek out that information. If you do read the thesis, I got a really fun example besides this one about Monty Python, but you'll have to read it to find out. All right, so that's one example. It's the only one I'm going to go into in any depth, but I have several others. So we could have, for example, textual archaeology. We could detect patterns. There are texts, scholarly articles, pieces of fiction that had surprising impact that are largely forgotten today, but influenced a whole bunch of their followers. For example, there's a book called Edison's Conquest of Mars. Nobody's heard of it. Well, somebody may have heard of it, but it was one of the earliest examples of space opera. It had space battles and ray guns and all this stuff. Some book had to do it first. Effectively, it did. At least that's the earliest one that we've found so far. And being able to turn an eye to that historical happenstance is kind of cool. This catalog might be able to help highlight some of those. Okay, so detecting change. So phylomemetic engrams. So engrams is a tool from Google. That's other things too, but it's also a tool from Google where you can notice the change in frequency of words over time. Well, the Phylomemetic Catalog would be able to record the change in memetic content of a text over time, at least as perceived by the public, and the change in its relationships to other texts over time. So say a movie adaptation comes out and the public starts to think, oh, this book actually has this other meaning than they thought beforehand. You can notice that change in cultural perception over time. For example, there's a book published called Station 11. It was about Canada after a global pandemic, published 2017-ish, 2010, in that area. It has a different understanding post-COVID. And this could capture some of that, some reflection of that. Another one, okay, memetic impact. Got those reversed, but anyways, so this was actually the Edison's Conquest of Mars. Textual archaeology one is about there's this idea called stylometrics where you can actually look at the style of writing in a piece of text and try and figure out who was the likely author. It's not 100% reliable, but you can do there's this whole debate about whether or not Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, and they did some stylometric analysis, and it's like, now Truman Capote's writing is actually fairly different. It seems very likely that Harper Lee actually wrote it. This could be part of that process because the memes exist at a different level of abstraction than the actual writing style, and so it's another layer that could be looked at as evidence. A similar idea here actually is mapping conceptual space. This is where we're starting to get really speculative, and it gets worse. But you might be able to look at the spread of memes or the different clusterings of memes and notice where people are, drawing their attention, what sort of combinations of memes are compelling to people. And then from that, you could actually possibly forecast where those trends are going in the future and say, okay, well, these 2 or 3 different cultural movements have been building. We might predict that some new texts in the combination of them might happen. Or you might say, well, I want to be the person who combines those. You see an opportunity available to you beyond just the continuing with the trends. You might find areas that are underappreciated, underdeveloped, and say that needs more highlighting. I can go where people currently aren't going. And the last idea I had is even if my wildest dreams come true and all of this is implemented, this too shall pass. It doesn't stop here. I think there is value in considering how to support whatever comes next. And so I have a bit of work on what sort of effort can we make early on in whatever new version of cataloging we develop to support what comes after that, and after that, and after that, forever. So in a phylomemetic catalog, the cataloger's job may consist of resolving interesting conflicts of understanding, stitching together trees of memetic inheritance generated by diverse communities. Clearly, there's a long way to go before that. But here it is. Practice. 1 prototype and some proposed functions. So conclusion, revolutionary optimism. I want people to feel eager and empowered to construct their own unique visions for their disciplines of concern. Knowledge organization, of course, that's where I'm coming from, but others as well. If you're interested in auto repair or art, I think this might be able to allow you to construct new visions for your field. I hope my work is proof by demonstration that it is possible to construct your own unique vision. I aim to provide a set of tools, methods, and approaches that can empower you to do that kind of work. We are all enculturated into a discipline, the bounds of which are determined by history and inertia and funding opportunities, some good reasons, some not, but they're all contingent reasons. Our traditions set expectations. You can do otherwise. There are challenges, and there's no assurance that your scheme will be adopted. Often those traditions did develop for good reasons, but how we imagine the field is up for debate and revision. The process of making explicit our values and assumptions matters more than the ultimate adoption of any particular vision. I don't actually expect the world to adopt phylomemetic cataloging, but I hope that it shows that there are assumptions that we're making and there's value propositions that we're accepting. So, one last time with the table, going up with traditional cataloging. They have all of existing cataloging effort and infrastructure. Their paradigm is find, select, obtain, explore. Their theory is exhaustive, exclusive, updatable, helpful sequence, and they have essentialist works. Phylomemetic cataloging starts with non-essentialist texts and memetic inheritance. It aims to be expanding, inclusive, universal, helpful sequences, and conciliant. It adds in visualize, ethical use, participate in the infrastructure, and it has 1 prototype. Yeah. So I'm optimistic about cataloging. I value the work that has been done, the often invisible infrastructure that serves us all, and it's through that optimism that I see opportunities for further steps to be made. I'm not claiming that cataloging needs to change, only that it has before and undoubtedly will again. So too with all fields of human endeavor. And we have the opportunity to be part of that next change. So that's my vision for what the catalog could be. More than an inventory, the catalog could be a place for participation, creation, and even fun. Thank you for listening. Patience.